The Grand Nexus Station sat at the center of known space, like a jewel hanging in the dark. It was old, older than most civilizations that used it. Its halls were carved from asteroid rock and lined with metals that glowed faintly blue, and every corridor hummed with the quiet power of 1,000 systems working together. This was where the Galactic Council met. 12 elder species, each one ancient beyond human understanding, gathered here to decide the fate of worlds. They had done it for 10,000 years. They had never once been wrong. At least, that was what they believed. High Arbiter Zorath stood at the center of the great chamber. He was tall and thin, with skin like cracked stone, and eyes that burned a pale gold. His species, the Vorani, had founded the council long before most of the other members had learned to build fire. He carried himself with the weight of that history in every step, every word. When he spoke, the chamber listened. It had no choice. The human problem, he began, his voice echoing off the curved walls, has grown beyond tolerance. Around him, the representatives of 11 other species sat in their designated seats. Some were massive, armored creatures with jaws that could crush steel. Others were small and delicate, their bodies almost transparent. All of them were powerful. All of them were old. And all of them looked down at the data Zorath projected into the air above the chamber floor. It showed a map of the galaxy. 200 years ago, humanity had been a single dot, one small planet orbiting an average star in an unremarkable arm of the Milky Way. Now, that dot had spread. Dozens of systems carried the mark of human settlement. Trade routes stretched across sectors that had once belonged to council-aligned species. Shipyards orbited gas giants, churning out vessels at a rate that made several ambassadors shift uncomfortably in their seats. They were given access to faster-than-light travel as a courtesy, Zorath continued, a gesture of welcome from the council to a young species. They were expected to settle a handful of systems, build quietly, learn their place. He paused. They have not learned their place. He listed the offenses. Humanity had refused to accept population limits set by the council. Their colonies grew too fast, too large, too loud. They terraformed worlds that had been designated as council preserves. They developed weapons, not just for defense, but weapons that pushed the boundaries of what the council considered acceptable. Plasma-based warheads, railgun platforms capable of punching through capital ships, and worst of all, they had begun research into hyperspace manipulation, a field the council had declared forbidden centuries ago. They are not partners, Zorath said, and his golden eyes swept the room. They are a threat. The chamber buzzed with agreement. The Bravari ambassador, a hulking creature covered in bone-white plates, slammed one fist against his console in approval. The Ulthani delegation, wispy beings who communicated through light pulses, flickered rapidly in what passed for applause among their kind. One by one, the elder species nodded, growled, or signaled their support. All except one. Ambassador Celery rose from her seat near the back of the chamber. She was Mirathi, a species known for their diplomatic skill and long memories. Her skin was smooth and silver, and her 4 eyes blinked in sequence as she waited for the room to quiet. "I have spent 11 years among humans," she said. Her voice was calm but firm. "I have walked their cities. I have eaten at their tables. I have watched their children play in parks built on worlds that were bare rock a generation before. And I am telling this council, with every fiber of my being, that you are making a mistake." Zorath tilted his head. "You are sentimental, Seluri." "I am observant," she replied. "The Bravari resisted the council once. You crushed them in 6 rotations. The Ulthani tried to break away. You blockaded them into submission within a year. You believe humans will fold the same way. They will not." She stepped forward, her silver hands gripping the railing in front of her. Humans do not fight the way other species fight. When the Bravari lost, they accepted it and moved on. When the Ulthani were beaten, they adapted to survive under council rule. Humans will do neither. They will not accept defeat, and they will not simply survive. They will remember. They will plan. And they will come back harder than before. She looked around the room, searching for any sign that her words were landing. She found none. They are creative in ways that should frighten you, she pressed. They took faster-than-light technology, something we gave them as a gift, and improved it within a single generation. They build faster than we do. They think differently than we do. And most dangerous of all, they do not fight wars to win territory or resources. They fight wars because they are angry. And once they are angry, they do not stop. Zorath let the silence hang for a moment, then waved one long-fingered hand dismissively. Thank you, Ambassador. Your concern is noted. The vote was called. 11 species voted in favor of war. 1 voted against. The motion passed, and the Grand Nexus Station transmitted the declaration across every diplomatic channel in the galaxy. The Galactic Council, supreme authority of known space, had formally declared war on the United Earth government. War Marshal Fenak received his orders within the hour. He was a Karathi, broad, scarred, built for battle. He had commanded the Council's military forces for decades and had never lost a campaign. He assembled a combined armada of over 6,000 warships drawn from 9 different species and set course for humanity's outer colonies. His plan was simple and brutal. Hit them fast, hit them hard, and break their will before they had time to organize. He expected the war to last 3 months at most. 12,000 light-years away, on a planet called Earth, Admiral Karen Whitley sat in a windowless room deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. She was 58 years old, with gray hair cut short and lines on her face that told the story of 30 years in uniform. She had commanded ships, led fleets, buried friends, and trained a generation of officers who respected her, not because she was kind, but because she was right. Her aide handed her a datapad. She read the Council's declaration. She read it again. Then she set the pad down on the table in front of her and sat very still for a long moment. How long before their fleet reaches our outer colonies? She asked. 6 weeks, maybe 7, her aide replied. Whitley nodded slowly. She stood up, straightened her uniform, and looked at the young officer standing nervously by the door. Get me everyone, she said. The aide blinked. Everyone, ma'am? Every fleet commander, every shipyard foreman, every scientist with a security clearance above level 4, every marine unit within recall distance. She picked up the datapad again and held it up. They just told us who they are. Now we show them who we are. The hallway beyond was already buzzing with activity. Officers running, screens lighting up, communication arrays humming to life. Somewhere above them, the sky was clear and blue and full of stars that humanity had claimed as its own. And somewhere out there, among those stars, a fleet of 6,000 warships was coming to take it all away. Karen Whitley walked into the hallway and did not look back. There was work to do. New Abilene was not the kind of planet that showed up in travel guides. It was a dusty, dry world on the edge of human space, with red soil, thin air, and winds that howled across flat plains for days without stopping. About 400,000 people called it home. Most of them were miners, engineers, or farmers working under greenhouse domes. It was not a glamorous place, but it was a human place, and the people who lived there had built it from nothing, with their own hands. Captain Danny Holt had been stationed at New Abilene for 3 months. His ship, the Iron Passage, was a Valor-class dreadnought, big, heavy, and built to take a beating. It was not the fastest ship in the fleet, and it was not the newest, but it had good guns and thick armor, and Danny Holt knew how to use both. He was 39 years old, with dark hair and a face that always looked like he was thinking about something he was not going to tell you. His crew liked him because he was steady. He never panicked. He never raised his voice. And when things went bad, he always had a plan. Things were about to go very bad. The Council fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Tau Kessler system on a Tuesday morning, local time. 600 warships, the forward element of Fenak's armada, appeared in a wall of light and metal that blotted out the stars. They came in a standard Council attack formation, a wide crescent with heavy cruisers at the center and screening frigates on the flanks. It was textbook. It was overwhelming, and it assumed that whatever was waiting for them would simply fall apart at the sight of it. Danny Holt was eating breakfast in the ship's mess hall when the alert came through. He set down his fork, wiped his mouth, and walked to the bridge without rushing. By the time he sat down in the command chair, his crew was already at battle stations. "How many?" he asked. 600 plus, Lieutenant Cody Marshall reported from the weapons console. Marshall was 26, skinny, and had the kind of brain that processed targeting data the way most people processed breathing. He was already running numbers. "They're coming in standard crescent. Heavy ships at the core." Holt nodded. "Activate Protocol Porcupine." Protocol Porcupine was not in any official manual. It was a contingency plan designed by Admiral Whitley years earlier, built on a simple idea. If someone comes to your house to pick a fight, make sure your house is full of sharp objects. New Abilene had been quietly fortified over the past 2 years. Orbital mines had been seeded in layers around the planet. Ground-based railgun batteries, massive weapons capable of firing tungsten slugs at a fraction of the speed of light, sat hidden beneath the red soil. And the civilian population had been drilled, over and over, on how to reach the deep bunkers carved into the planet's bedrock. The mines went first. The Council fleet's forward screening ships flew straight into them. The first wave of detonations ripped through a dozen frigates before the rest of the formation could react. Fire blossomed in the silence of space, and wreckage tumbled in every direction. The crescent wavered. Then the railgun batteries opened up from the surface. Slugs, traveling at impossible speed, punched through cruiser hulls like needles through cloth. 2 heavy ships broke apart within the first 60 seconds. A third lost power and drifted, dark and dead, into the debris field left by the mines. On the Council flagship, the commander of the forward fleet stared at his tactical display in disbelief. This was supposed to be a lightly defended colony world. This was supposed to be easy. It was not easy. But the Council still had numbers, and numbers mattered. The fleet pushed through the outer defenses, absorbing losses but pressing forward with the grinding weight of 600 ships. They reached orbital range and began bombardment. Plasma beams and kinetic rounds rained down on New Abilene's surface, cratering the plains and shattering greenhouse domes. Below ground, 400,000 civilians huddled in bunkers that went a full kilometer deep. The walls shook. Dust fell from the ceilings. Children cried, and parents held them close. But the bunkers held. They had been designed to survive exactly this. Above them, Danny Holt fought. The iron passage absorbed hit after hit, its armor glowing white in places, its hull groaning under the strain. Holt maneuvered through the chaos with the calm of a man who had accepted what was happening and decided to make it cost as much as possible. He destroyed 9 Council ships before a plasma beam tore through his port engine array and forced him to begin a fighting withdrawal. As the iron passage limped away from New Abilene, Holt ordered every piece of combat footage broadcast on open channels. Every frequency, every band. He wanted the entire galaxy to see what the Council had done to a world full of farmers and miners. He wanted them to see the burning domes and the craters where homes had been. and he wanted them to see that not a single human ship had surrendered. The galaxy watched. On 100 worlds, species that had lived under council rule for centuries saw the footage and felt something they had not felt in a long time. Some of them called it pity. Some called it admiration. A few, quietly, called it hope. Back on Earth, Admiral Karen Whitley stood before the full command staff of the United Earth Defense Force. The room was underground, lit by cold white lights, and every chair was filled. Officers, scientists, intelligence chiefs, logistics commanders, they all sat in silence as Whitley activated a display showing the damage at New Abilene. They hit a colony of 400,000 people, she said. Her voice was flat and controlled. Civilians, families, they came with 600 warships to bomb farmers. She let that sit for a moment. The Council believes this will break us. They believe we will see this and lose our nerve. They are wrong. She pressed a button on her console. The display changed. It showed a schematic, a complex web of shipyards, factories, research stations, and supply lines spanning dozens of systems. Lines connected everything, and at the center was a single word: furnace. Effective immediately, I am activating the furnace doctrine, Whitley announced. Every shipyard in human space shifts to wartime production. Every factory converts to military output. Every research project that is not directly related to winning this war is suspended. She looked around the room. We are not going to match them ship for ship. We are going to outbuild them, outthink them, and outfight them. And we are going to make them regret every single shot they fired at New Abilene. In the days that followed, humanity moved with a speed that stunned even its own leaders. Shipyards that had been producing civilian transports began rolling out warships. Mining colonies doubled their output. Universities emptied as engineers and scientists volunteered for military research programs. It was not organized, it was not pretty, but it was fast, and it was furious, and it did not stop. Deep in the outer reaches of the solar system, Dr. Nora Phelps received a message at Research Station Ouroboros. She was a small woman with messy brown hair and glasses she kept pushing up her nose, and she had spent the last 4 years working on a project that most people thought was impossible, a device that could collapse hyperspace lanes. The message from Admiral Whitley was short. You have unlimited resources. Finish it. Nora read the message, looked at her team, and said, well, I guess we're not sleeping anymore. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Cody Marshall had been reassigned from the damaged Iron Passage to Admiral Whitley's command ship. He spent 3 straight days reviewing every piece of battle data from New Abilene, running simulations, and drinking terrible coffee. On the 4th day, he walked into Whitley's office with dark circles under his eyes and a datapad in his hand. I found something, he said. Their fleet uses a centralized command relay. Every order goes through the flagship and gets pushed out to individual ships. If we cut that relay, their captains don't know what to do. They're not trained for independent action. They've never had to be. Whitley took the datapad and studied it. For the first time since the war began, she smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a woman who had just found the crack in the wall. How sure are you? She asked. Very, Marshall said. Whitley set the datapad down. Then we're going to use it. And when we do, they're going to wish they'd never heard of us. Somewhere out in the dark, between the stars, War Marshal Fennek was already planning his next move. He was confident. He had the numbers, the ships, and the history of 1,000 victories behind him. He did not know about Protocol Porcupine. He did not know about the Furnace Doctrine. He did not know about the young lieutenant who had found the weakness in his entire command structure. He would learn. 6 weeks passed after New Abilene, and the galaxy held its breath. The Council's propaganda channels declared the strike a success, a necessary show of force against a reckless species that had grown too bold. War Marshal Fennek gave interviews from his flagship, assuring the elder races that humanity would be brought to heel within the season. He spoke with the easy confidence of a predator who had never once been prey. Behind that confidence, the numbers were less comfortable. The losses at New Abilene had been heavier than expected. 43 ships destroyed outright. Another 60 damaged badly enough to require weeks of repair. And the footage that Captain Danny Holt had broadcast across open channels had done something Fennec had not anticipated. On dozens of neutral worlds, species that had no stake in the war were watching, talking, and beginning to ask uncomfortable questions about whether the Council had gone too far. Fennec ignored all of it. He had his orders, and he had his fleet, and he pushed deeper into human space with the grinding certainty of a landslide. His next target was the Hollow Ridge Nebula. Hollow Ridge was a vast cloud of gas and dust that stretched across 3 star systems. It was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are. Swirls of purple and gold lit from within by young stars, with pockets of darkness where the gas was thick enough to block all light. 3 human colony worlds sat inside the nebula, along with a major supply depot that served as a hub for military logistics in the region. Taking Hollow Ridge would cut humanity's supply lines across an entire sector and open a straight path toward the inner colonies. Over 4,000 warships formed up at the nebula's edge. He sent scout ships ahead to map safe routes through the gas clouds. He positioned his flagship at the center of the formation, where the command relay could reach every ship in the fleet. Everything was by the book. Everything was precise. Everything was exactly what Admiral Karen Whitley wanted him to do. 3 weeks before Thenak arrived, Whitley had ordered the complete evacuation of all 3 colony worlds in Hollow Ridge. It was a massive operation. Nearly 2 million civilians moved through emergency transports to safer systems deeper in human space. The evacuation was conducted under total communications blackout. No signals in or out. No records that could be intercepted. As far as the rest of the galaxy knew, Hollow Ridge was still populated. The supply depot was kept running. Lights stayed on. Cargo manifests were transmitted on schedule. Transport ships docked and departed at regular intervals, though most of them carried nothing but automated systems running on loop. The depot looked alive. It was a shell. Sergeant Vince Gallagher and his 9th Orbital Drop Regiment, the Hammers, had been inserted onto the depot station weeks earlier. Gallagher was 44, built like a piece of industrial equipment, and had the kind of voice that could be heard through a hull breach. His soldiers were the best close combat unit in the UEDF, and they had been given one simple job: keep the lights on and wait. Waiting was the hard part. Gallagher's people lived in the depot's maintenance tunnels, eating cold rations and sleeping in shifts on metal floors. They ran drills in whispers. They checked their weapons so many times that every soldier could field strip their rifle blindfolded. And they watched the long-range sensors, counting down the days until the Council fleet appeared. Specialist Amy Dawson arrived at Hollow Ridge aboard a stealth corvette so small and quiet that it barely registered on sensors, even at close range. She was 31, with short red hair and a face that gave away nothing. She spoke maybe 20 words a day on a talkative day. But put her in front of a computer terminal, and she became something else entirely. Fast, precise, and absolutely merciless. Dawson had spent 2 years building a cyber warfare package specifically designed to target Council communication systems. She had studied every piece of captured Council technology, every intercepted signal, every scrap of data from New Abilene. She knew how their command relay worked better than most Council engineers did. And she had built a virus that would not destroy it. Destruction would be noticed immediately. Instead, her virus would do something much worse. It would introduce a delay. Just 3 seconds. 3 seconds between every order sent from the flagship and every order received by the fleet. In a conversation, 3 seconds was nothing. In a battle, 3 seconds was a lifetime. Captain Danny Holt arrived last. The iron passage had been repaired, though it still bore scars from New Abilene. Patches of fresh armor plating that did not quite match the original hull, a port engine array that ran a little rough, and a long black burn mark along the starboard side that the crew had decided to leave as a reminder. Holt brought with him a wolf pack of 12 fast-attack frigates, each one stripped down for speed and loaded with short-range weapons designed to get in close and do maximum damage. They hid inside the nebula. The gas clouds of Hollow Ridge were thick enough to mask energy signatures, and the young stars within the nebula created enough background radiation to cover the heat output of a small fleet. Holt positioned his wolf pack at 3 different points along the predicted path of the Council advance, tucked into pockets of dense gas like wolves waiting in tall grass. Then they waited. Fennac's fleet entered the nebula on a cold morning by Earth's calendar. 4,000 ships pushed through the outer gas clouds in tight formation, sensors straining against the interference. The nebula made everything harder. Visibility was poor, communications were fuzzy, and the swirling gas played tricks on targeting systems. Fennac compensated by tightening his formation and increasing the power of his command relay. He was 5 hours into the nebula when his forward scouts reported contact with the supply depot. It was right where intelligence said it would be, glowing with activity, transmitting on standard frequencies. Fennac ordered his fleet to advance. Amy Dawson watched from her stealth corvette as 4,000 warships moved past her position like a river of metal. She waited until the bulk of the fleet had passed the point of no return, deep enough into the nebula that turning around would take hours. Then she activated her virus. It moved through the Council's communication network like smoke through a ventilation system. Silent, invisible. It touched every relay node, every command buffer, every signal router in the fleet. And then it began to add its 3-second delay. On the Council flagship, nobody noticed at first. The system showed green across the board. But when Fennac issued his next formation order, something felt wrong. Ships responded a beat too late. Corrections came a moment after they should have. The formation began to drift, not dramatically, but enough. That was when Danny Holt struck. His wolf pack erupted from the gas clouds like a fist. 12 frigates hit the fleet's left flank at full speed, targeting engine systems and sensor arrays with concentrated fire. The Council ships tried to respond, but every order was 3 seconds behind. Ships turned too late. Guns fired at positions that were already empty. Confusion rippled through the ranks as captains received instructions that no longer matched what their own eyes were telling them. Holt's frigates tore through the flank and disappeared back into the gas before the Council ships could form a coherent response. They struck again from a different angle, then again. Each attack was short, brutal, and precisely timed to exploit the delay in Council communications. And then, at the far edge of the nebula, Admiral Karen Whitley arrived with the main fleet. 200 human warships dropped out of hyperspace in a staggered line, their weapons already hot. Whitley had positioned her fleet to block the only clear exit from the nebula, turning the gas clouds that Fennac had entered so confidently into a cage. The battle lasted 11 hours. It was chaotic, savage, and fought at ranges so close that ships sometimes collided. The nebula's gas clouds turned the engagement into a brawl. Formations broke apart, sensors failed, and entire squadrons lost contact with each other for minutes at a time. In that environment, the Council's centralized command structure was a cripple. Their captains, trained to follow orders from above, floundered when those orders arrived late or not at all. Human captains, trained to think for themselves, thrived. When it was over, Fennac had lost nearly 1,400 ships. The rest of his fleet limped out of the nebula through a secondary route that Whitley had deliberately left open. She wanted him to retreat, not to make a last stand. Defeated enemies who ran could be chased. Defeated enemies, who were cornered, had nothing to lose. Thenax sent furious messages to High Arbiter Zorath, demanding reinforcements, fresh ships, and an explanation for why his intelligence had failed to detect the trap. Zorath, sitting in the Grand Nexus station, read the reports and felt something he had not felt in centuries: doubt. 3 member species of the Council quietly withdrew their ships from Thenax's command within the week. They cited logistical concerns. Everyone knew the real reason. The war was not going the way it was supposed to. And deep in the outer solar system, aboard research station Ouroboros, Dr. Nora Phelps ran the final calibration on a device the size of a small building. She wiped sweat from her forehead, pushed her glasses up her nose, and turned to her team. "It works," she said quietly. "Tell the Admiral it works." The next phase of the war was about to begin, and humanity was not finished surprising the galaxy. Not by a long way. The defeat at Hollow Ridge broke something inside the Galactic Council. Not the military. Thenax still had thousands of ships, and the Council's combined industrial capacity dwarfed humanity's by an order of magnitude. What broke was something harder to repair than ships. It was certainty. For 10,000 years, the Council had operated on the belief that it could not lose. That belief had cracked at New Abilene. At Hollow Ridge, it shattered. High Arbiter Zorath sat alone in his private chamber aboard the Grand Nexus station. The room was dark, except for the pale glow of a holographic display that showed the current state of the war. Red markers for Council losses. Blue markers for human positions. There was far too much red, and the blue was spreading in ways that his strategists could not explain. Humans were not supposed to fight like this. They were a young species. They had no history of galactic war. They should have been overwhelmed in the first week. Instead, they were winning. Zorath made a decision born not from strategy, but from fear, though he would never have called it that. He called it necessity. He ordered the construction of a planet cracker, a weapon so massive and so terrible that it had not been built in over 3,000 years. The last time one had been used, it had ended a war by turning an entire world into an expanding cloud of rock and ash. The species that had lived on that world no longer existed. That was the point. The weapon would be built at the Vorath shipyard, the most heavily fortified construction facility in Council space. Vorath sat deep behind Council lines, protected by dozens of controlled hyperspace lanes and guarded by a permanent defense fleet. It was, by any reasonable measure, untouchable. Zorath planned to aim it at Earth. The logic was simple in the way that desperate logic often is. Destroy the human homeworld, and the colonies would lose their center, their government, their military command, their cultural heart. All of it would be gone. The remaining human settlements, scattered and leaderless, would have no choice but to surrender. It was monstrous. Zorath did not care. He was done being careful. Ambassador Saluri learned of the plan through channels she was not supposed to have access to. She confronted Zorath in private, her silver face tight with barely contained anger. "You are building a weapon to destroy a planet of 8 billion people," she said. "Children, families, artists and farmers and teachers. You would wipe them all out." Zorath did not look at her. "I would end the war. You would commit the greatest atrocity in galactic history." "History," Zorath replied coldly, "is written by those who survive." Saluri left the chamber, knowing that words alone would not stop what was coming. She began making plans of her own, quietly, carefully, reaching out to allies within the Council who shared her growing horror at what the war had become. 12,000 light-years away, Admiral Karen Whitley already knew about the planet cracker. Human intelligence networks were something the Council had consistently underestimated, mostly because they could not understand them. The elder species relied on technology for espionage, surveillance satellites, signal interception, quantum encrypted communications. Humans used all of those things too, but they also used something older and far more difficult to detect. People. Human operatives had been embedded in council space for years, posing as traders, refugees, and laborers. They built relationships. They passed information through methods so low-tech that council counterintelligence did not even think to look for them. Within days of Zorath's order, Whitley had a full intelligence briefing on the planet cracker. She knew where it was being built. She knew the timeline. She knew that the weapon would be operational in approximately 8 weeks. And she knew that once it was complete, there would be nothing in the human arsenal capable of stopping it. She had to destroy it before it was finished. The problem was Vorath. The Vorath system was behind enemy lines. Getting there through conventional hyperspace routes would mean fighting through dozens of council-held systems, each one defended by fleets that would slow any human advance to a crawl. By the time a conventional force reached Vorath, the planet cracker would be ready and Earth would be dead. Whitley called a war council in the deep command bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains. The room was smaller than people imagined. Just a round table, a dozen chairs, and screens on every wall. Captain Danny Holt was there, his face thinner than it had been at New Abilene. Sergeant Vince Gallagher sat with his arms crossed, looking like a man who was ready to fight the table if it gave him trouble. Lieutenant Cody Marshall had dark circles under his eyes that had become a permanent feature. Specialist Amy Dawson sat in the corner, quiet as always, her eyes already running calculations. And Dr. Nora Phelps stood at the head of the table with a data pad in her hand, and a look on her face that was equal parts excitement and terror. "Gatekeeper can do more than collapse hyperspace lanes," she said without preamble. "With enough power, it can force open a new, unstable lane between 2 points, any 2 points, including from here to Vorath." The room went very quiet. The window would be narrow, roughly 40 minutes before the lane destabilizes and collapses. Whatever goes through would have no way back until we calculate and open a new lane, which would take at least several hours, maybe longer. "So it's a one-way trip," Holt said. "Into the most heavily defended system in Council space," Gallagher added. "With no retreat and no reinforcements," Marshall finished. Phelps nodded. Yes, all of those things. Whitley looked around the table. She did not ask for volunteers. She did not need to. Every person in that room had seen the footage from New Abilene. Every one of them had lost friends, colleagues, or family in the weeks since the war began. And every one of them knew what a planet cracker pointed at Earth meant. Holt spoke first. "The Iron Passage will lead the strike group. The hammers will board the weapon and take it apart from the inside." Dawson said nothing, but she placed her data pad on the table. On its screen was a complete schematic of the Vorath shipyard's defense network, already annotated with vulnerabilities and attack vectors. She had been preparing for this before the meeting even started. Marshall leaned forward. "I'll coordinate fleet weapons from the flagship. We hit them from every angle at once, and don't give them time to think." Whitley nodded. Then she said something that surprised everyone in the room. "I'm taking the flagship through the lane myself." Holt frowned. "Admiral, with respect." "With respect, Captain. I am not sending people on a one-way mission through a hole in space and sitting here watching it on a screen." Her voice left no room for argument. "I started this doctrine. I built this strategy. If it fails, I should be there when it does. And, if it works, I want to see the look on their faces." Nobody argued after that. The operation was designated Final Word. 47 ships were selected. The best crews, the toughest hulls, the sharpest minds in the fleet. They gathered in high orbit above Earth, running final checks and loading ammunition. Engineers worked around the clock, reinforcing armor and calibrating weapons. Chaplains moved quietly through the ships, talking to anyone who wanted to talk. Not everyone did. Some people wrote letters. Some people stared out viewports at the blue curve of Earth below them. Some just sat with their thoughts and made peace with whatever they needed to make peace with. Dr. Nora Phelps activated Gatekeeper from Station Ouroboros. The device drew power from 3 separate reactor arrays, and when it fired, every light on the station flickered, and half the non-essential systems shut down. Space itself screamed. There was no other word for it. A jagged wound tore open in the fabric of reality. A tunnel of distorted light and crushed physics that connected Earth's solar system to the Vorath system 12,000 light-years away. It was ugly. It was unstable. And it was open. Admiral Karen Whitley stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the rift pulse and writhe on the main display. Around her, 46 other ships formed up in a tight assault column. Every weapon was armed, every shield was up, every crew was at battle stations. All ships, Whitley said calmly into the fleet-wide channel. This is Admiral Whitley. On the other side of that lane is the weapon they built to kill our world. We are going to go through and we are going to destroy it. Some of us will not come back. I will not pretend otherwise. She paused. But I will tell you this. 100 years from now, when people talk about the moment that decided whether humanity had a future, they will talk about what we do in the next 40 minutes. Make it count. She cut the channel and looked at her helmsman. Take us in. The flagship surged forward. Behind it, 46 ships followed in single file, plunging into the screaming wound in space. The rift swallowed them one by one, and then the darkness of normal space returned, quiet and empty, as if nothing had happened. 40 minutes. That was all they had. On the other side, over 2,000 Council warships waited around the most powerful weapon ever built. The 47 human ships emerged from the rift into the Vorath system like bullets from a gun. There was no graceful deceleration, no careful formation. They came through fast and hot and screaming on every frequency, and the first thing they saw was the planet cracker. It hung in space like a cathedral made of metal and malice. The weapon was enormous, over 12 kilometers long, bristling with energy conduits and structural supports that connected to the shipyard around it, like veins feeding a monstrous heart. It was not yet complete. Sections of the hull were still open, and construction drones moved along its surface like insects on a corpse. But even unfinished, it radiated a kind of terrible promise. This was a thing built for one purpose only, and that purpose was the death of a world. Around it, the Vorath defense fleet filled every sector of space. Over 2,000 warships, arranged in layered defensive shells, with the planet cracker at the center. Sensor stations, weapons platforms, and drone carriers dotted the gaps between the larger ships. It was the most heavily defended position in the galaxy, and it had been designed to be impenetrable. Admiral Karen Whitley studied the tactical display for exactly 4 seconds. Then she gave the order that no Council commander would have given. The order that broke every rule of conventional warfare, the order that won the battle before it even began. All ships, ignore the defense fleet, full speed at the shipyard, do not stop for anything. 47 ships accelerated directly toward the planet cracker. They did not attempt to engage the 2,000 warships around them. They did not maneuver to avoid fire. They simply pointed themselves at the target and burned every engine they had. It was, by every military textbook the Council had ever written, suicide. And that was precisely why it worked. The Council defenders had trained for thousands of years to fight enemies who behaved rationally. Rational enemies engaged your outer defenses. Rational enemies tried to create openings before committing their main force. Rational enemies did not charge directly into the teeth of a fortified position outnumbered 40-1. Humans, as it turned out, had a different definition of rational. The defense fleet hesitated. It was only a moment, perhaps 5 seconds, but 5 seconds was enough. Individual captains, receiving lagged orders through the same centralized command relay that Amy Dawson had already proven she could cripple, broke formation trying to intercept the humans from multiple angles. Ships that should have created a unified wall of fire instead tangled their own firing solutions, afraid to shoot for fear of hitting their own vessels on the other side of the human charge. Captain Danny Holt drove the Iron Passage straight down the middle. His ship was the biggest and the toughest in the strike group, and he used it like a battering ram. Plasma fire hammered the dreadnought's armor from every direction. Hull plates buckled. Compartments vented atmosphere. Fire suppression systems screamed warnings that nobody had time to read. But the Iron Passage kept moving, soaking up punishment that would have destroyed 3 lesser ships. And the vessels behind it used the gap Holt created to push through. Hull integrity at 41%, his damage control officer reported, voice tight with controlled fear. He did not change course. Behind the Iron Passage, the troop transports carrying Sergeant Vince Gallagher's 9th Orbital Drop Regiment raced toward the Planet Cracker's superstructure. Gallagher stood in the drop bay of his transport, mag boots locked to the deck, surrounded by 200 of the most dangerous close combat soldiers humanity had ever produced. They wore heavy assault armor and carried weapons designed for fighting inside the corridors and compartments of enemy structures. Shotguns, breaching charges, short-range plasma cutters. 30 seconds to contact, the pilot announced. Gallagher looked at his people. Some of them were praying. Some were checking their weapons for the 15th time. One private in the back was humming a song that Gallagher did not recognize. All of them were afraid. All of them were going anyway. Hammers, Gallagher said, and his voice filled the bay like a drum. We came here to break something. Let's not disappoint. The transport slammed into the Planet Cracker's unfinished hull sections, burning through the exposed framework with breaching lasers and clamping on like parasites. Drop doors blew open, and 200 soldiers poured into the weapon's interior. The Council had not stationed a large ground force inside the Planet Cracker. They had not expected anyone to be insane enough to board it during a space battle. The construction crews, engineers, technicians, and a small security detachment were overwhelmed within minutes. Gallagher's hammers moved through the weapons corridors with brutal efficiency, clearing rooms and securing junctions while pushing deeper toward the power core at the weapons center. Outside, Amy Dawson worked her own kind of violence. Her stealth corvette had slipped through the chaos of the battle unnoticed, and she had docked with the Vorath shipyard's external communication array. From there, she cracked the station's defense grid in under 3 minutes. It was, she would later admit, not her best work. She blamed the time pressure. But it was enough. The shipyard's automated turret systems, designed to protect the Planet Cracker from external threats, suddenly received new targeting parameters. They turned on the Council fleet. Hundreds of weapon platforms that had been pointed outward now fired inward, striking Council ships from angles they had never anticipated. The defense fleet, already confused by the human charge, descended into chaos as their own station began shooting at them. Lieutenant Cody Marshall stood at the weapons coordination console aboard Whitley's flagship, and he conducted the battle like a musician conducts an orchestra. He tracked every human ship, every Council vessel, every turret that Dawson had turned, and he called targets with a speed and precision that pushed the limits of what a human brain could do. He assigned firing solutions, redirected squadrons, identified weak points in the Council formation, and fed that data to every ship in the strike group in real time. Cruiser group at bearing 270 is rotating to flank, he announced. Iron Passage, shift fire 30 degrees port. Frigate Wing 3, you have a gap at their stern. Take it. The battle raged. Council ships fired desperately at the human vessels, and they scored hits. A human frigate took a direct strike to its reactor and vanished in a flash of white light. A corvette was cut in half by a plasma beam. Another transport, already empty of its soldiers, was crushed between 2 Council cruisers that converged on it from opposite sides. The humans were taking losses, But they were not stopping. Inside the planet cracker, Gallagher's hammers reached the power core. It was a massive chamber at the heart of the weapon, filled with energy conduits as thick as tree trunks, and humming with a sound that vibrated in the teeth. The core was still charging. The weapon was not yet operational, but the energy contained within it was enough to level a city. Gallagher's demolition team went to work. They placed shaped charges at the structural weak points identified by Marshall's targeting data, working fast and precise, while the rest of the unit held the corridors against a growing counterattack from Council security forces who had finally organized a response. The fighting was close, brutal, and ugly. Council soldiers, tall, armored Karathi warriors, charged down the corridors with heavy weapons. Gallagher's people met them with shotguns, grenades, and fists when it came to that. The hammers lost soldiers in those corridors. Good soldiers. They held anyway. Charges set, the demolition lead reported. All units fall back to extraction, Gallagher ordered. He was bleeding from a wound on his left arm that he had not had time to notice. Move, now. The hammers fought their way back through the corridors to their transports. The Council security forces pursued, and the retreat cost them dearly. By the time the last transport detached from the planet cracker, Gallagher had lost a third of his regiment. He stood in the drop bay and counted the faces that were missing, and felt the weight of every single one. But they were clear. The charges detonated. The planet cracker's power core ruptured in a cascade of explosions that tore the weapon apart from the inside. The blast consumed half the shipyard with it, sending a shockwave of debris and energy that scattered the nearest Council ships like leaves in a storm. The thing that had been built to destroy Earth died in fire and silence, and it took a piece of the Council shipyard with it. Admiral Whitley watched the explosion bloom on her tactical display. The clock on her console read 31 minutes elapsed. 9 minutes remained before the hyperspace lane collapsed. All ships, she said, withdraw to the rift. Best speed. The human fleet turned and ran. The Council defense fleet, shattered and disorganized, tried to pursue, but Dawson's hijacked turrets kept firing, and Marshall's coordination kept the human ships ahead of the pursuit. One by one, the 47 ships, those that survived, reached the rift and plunged through. The Iron Passage went last. It was barely holding together. Its armor was gone in places. Its engines were failing, and half its compartments were open to space. But Danny Holt kept it flying through sheer stubbornness and a crew that refused to let their ship die. They crossed the rift with 2 minutes to spare. Behind them, War Marshal Fennock's reinforcement fleet dropped out of hyperspace at Vorath, just in time to watch the rift close. He stared at the wreckage of the shipyard, the burning skeleton of the planet cracker, and the empty space where the human fleet had been. He had nothing to say. There was nothing to say. In the weeks that followed, the Galactic Council collapsed like a building with its foundation removed. 7 of the 12 member species sued for peace within days. They had seen enough. The war that was supposed to last 3 months had instead revealed that the Council was not invincible, that its military doctrine was outdated, and that the species it had dismissed as young and reckless was capable of things that terrified the oldest civilizations in the galaxy. War Marshal Fennock was removed from command. He accepted his disgrace in silence and disappeared from public life. Some said he retired to a quiet world at the edge of Karathi space. Others said he spent his remaining years studying human military history, trying to understand where he had gone wrong. Nobody knew for sure. High Arbiter Zorath attempted to rally the remaining loyalist species for a continued war effort. He gave speeches about duty and legacy, and the danger of allowing humans to go unchecked. Nobody listened. Ambassador Seluri, who had warned against the war from the very beginning, led a formal vote of no confidence that stripped Zorath of his title. He was the first High Arbiter removed from power in 4,000 years. He left the Grand Nexus Station without a word, and the doors closed behind him for the last time. The surrender was signed aboard the Iron Passage. Admiral Karen Whitley insisted on it, not out of cruelty, but because she wanted the Council to see the ship they had tried so hard to destroy. Still flying, still scarred, still crewed by people who had chosen to be there. The ship's corridors still smelled like smoke and sealant. Patches of fresh metal covered wounds that would take months to fully repair. The crew stood at attention as the Council delegation came aboard, and not one of them looked away. Whitley offered terms that were firm but fair. Humanity did not want an empire. They wanted a seat at the table, full membership in the Council, equal trade access, an end to population restrictions and forbidden research lists, and a guarantee, written into law, that no species would ever again build a weapon designed to destroy a world. The Council delegation signed everything. As the ceremony concluded, a Council diplomat, a young Marathi, one of Saluri's protégés, approached Whitley. The diplomat was curious, and perhaps a little afraid, and asked the question that every species in the galaxy was asking. How did you do it? How did a species as young as yours defeat a coalition that ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years? Whitley considered the question. She looked out the viewport of the Iron Passage at the stars that stretched away in every direction, stars that belonged to no one and everyone, stars that humans had reached for since the first night they had looked up and wondered what was out there. You declared war on a species that treats spite as a fuel source, she said. That was your final mistake. The galaxy entered a new era that day, not a human era. Whitley had been clear about that. A shared era. An era where the old rules were gone and new ones had to be written, together, by species that had spent too long either ruling or being ruled. Humanity did not conquer the galaxy. They just made sure that no one would ever try to erase them again. And across the vast, quiet dark between the stars, every species that had watched and waited and wondered, they remembered what they had seen. They remembered that a young species from a small planet had faced the greatest power in the galaxy and had refused to kneel. That memory lasted a very long time.